There we are. Microphone check. Palette check. Background check. Computer overheating check. Good evening. The Academy of Language Therapy and Life Coaching will be presenting this evening a series of reports created by the Health Ranger Mike Adams from naturalnews.com. So sit back, relax, chill out. You don't have to surf the net. We've selected the best content for you, something educational, something to drive you forward, something to help you with your quality of life. So I'm going to be hanging out in the background, and I'm going to leave you in the capable and able hands. Feel free to thumbs up, let me know everything's going out cool on the other side. I'm going to leave you in the capable hands of Mike Adams, the Health Ranger. And we begin this evening's program with the stock market explained. Do people really make money on the stock market? Do people really create value on the stock market? Really? Really? Do they? Well, that's the question. Why don't we find out what Mike Adams has to say about it? If you have any questions, write them in the chat. I'll be hanging out. So let's leave Michael to do his stuff.
If you think the stock market makes money for those who own stocks while the prices rise, it's time to show you a little mathematical demonstration. Let's take three people who might represent typical stock market investors. We'll call them Bob, Jane, and Gaylord. Bob, Jane, and Gaylord all start with $1,000 in their pockets. The total of the assets of these three is $3,000. Now, one day, a new evil corporation is launched called Greed, Inc. The opening stock price of Greed, Inc. is $100. Bob, Jane, and Gaylord all decide to buy one share of Greed, Inc. at $100 per share. Now, each of them has $900 in cash and $100 in Greed, Inc. shares. The total of the assets is still $3,000 across all three people, right? But now, Greed, Inc. gets mentioned by Jim Cramer on CNBC, who says greed is good and it's going to make you rich. Suddenly, TV-watching casual investors from all over the country decide to start buying shares of Greed. The share price rises rapidly, reaching $150. Not surprisingly, Bob, Jane, and Gaylord think to themselves, we just made a 50% return on our $100 investment, because now, you see, each of them has $900 in cash and $150 worth of Greed shares, for which they only paid $100 per share. So of course they realize they don't have quite enough greed and would like to buy more. So they each spend $300 of their own cash to purchase 2 more shares of Greed at $150 each. Now, Bob, Jane, and Gaylord each have $600 in cash and a total of 3 shares of Greed, each valued at $150. Where they started with $1,000 each, they now have $1,050 each worth of assets, that being cash plus stock shares. Greed is good, they realize. Because Greed Inc. is now rapidly rising, people tell their friends about the benefits of investing in Greed. Predictably, that drives up the stock price even more. Now it reaches $200 per share. Bob, Jane, and Gaylord are jumping for joy. Where they started with just $1,000 in cash, each of them now owns $600 in cash plus 3 shares of Greed Inc. worth $200 each, making another $600 in value, achieving a total of $1,200 in assets per person. If you add up the assets for all 3, that's now $3,600 in total. But they started with only $3,000 in cash total. So where did the extra $600 in value come from? The answer is that the extra $600 is fictional. It does not exist in the real world. It only exists as a temporary projection of the psychology of price expectations. The extra $600, in other words, is a phenomenon of human psychology, not economic reality. But Bob, Jane, and Gaylord don't know that, because the fake news media never explained how the stock market is actually a giant scam for suckers. So they decide to go all in and spend all their remaining cash on Greed Inc. shares, spending their remaining $600 in cash to buy 3 more shares each, leaving them with 0 cash, but now owning 6 shares of Greed per person. Now, because the psychology of market expectations is self-reinforcing, the higher the share prices go, the more people want to purchase the shares at higher and higher prices. When there are more buyers than sellers, share prices rise, convincing current holders of shares that they are amazingly brilliant investors. So the public keeps buying more shares of Greed, driving the price to $300, $400, and then even $1,000 per share. At $1,000 per share, Bob, Jane, and Gaylord each have $6,000 in assets because they own 6 shares each. In total, they now own $18,000 worth of Greed shares. It's amazing. Everything is awesome. When markets rise irrationally, they generate the illusion of prosperity by convincing all the market participants that all their shares are now worth the same buying price as the last share that was purchased in the marketplace. This is how Bob, Jane, and Gaylord, who began with just $3,000 in cash, now believe they own $18,000 worth of corporate shares. Because banks consider stocks to be assets valued at the current high price in the market, Bob can get a loan for a jet ski by citing his stock ownership as an asset. Jane can take out a loan to fund a vacation to Tahiti, and Gaylord can borrow money to get that cosmetic surgery he always wanted to reduce the size of his chemically induced man boobs. Sadly, it turns out that the business model of Greed Inc. didn't really work, and the claimed profits turned out to be nothing more than Arthur Anderson-style creative accounting, which isn't really accounting at all. Suddenly, the bottom falls out of the greed market as greed turns to panic. All at once, nobody wants anything to do with greed, and they rush to sell. Now, because sellers vastly outnumber buyers, share prices plummet, falling from $1,000 to $500 to $200, and finally bottoming out at its original price of $100 per share. Bob, Jane, and Gaylord are devastated. They each own 6 shares of Greed Inc., now worth just $600, instead of the $6,000 they thought they had when the stock price was high. So they believe they lost 90% of their holdings. So here's the question. If they originally had $1,000 in cash each, and they traded the cash for shares that they believed rose to $6,000 in value per person, and then the shares crashed so low that they now have just $600 in stock assets per person, the difference between the aggregate stock high, $6,000 in value, versus the aggregate stock low, $600 in value, is $5,400, right? Now that's $5,400 these people thought they had, but it's now gone. The question for you is, where did this $5,400 actually go? The average stock market investor thinks that when they get screwed, that the money must have gone to rich people. In truth, the right answer is that it didn't go anywhere. It never actually existed, except in the illusion of stock market valuations, which makes people falsely believe that every outstanding share of a corporation has the same value as the last share that was bought or sold. But this fundamental phenomenon, which underpins the entire free market system of resource allocation, is based on one extraordinary lie. A lie that everybody can sell at the current high price. In truth, only a tiny fraction of shares can ever sell without causing share prices to plummet. This means that stock valuations are largely illusory, and just as rising stock markets create the illusion of the creation of wealth, falling stock markets also create the illusion of the destruction of wealth. Neither of these is a real phenomenon. Both are rooted in self-deception that's so deeply ingrained in the psychology of the stock market that almost nobody can see it, even though the math is obvious to a fifth grader. The only money that Bob, Jane, and Gaylord really lost was whatever they don't have now from their original $1,000. The apparent valuations, the apparent gains, and the apparent losses were all nothing more than financial projections of human psychology. The bottom line is that greed does not create wealth, and fear does not destroy it. Greed and fear only impact the illusion of wealth that people think is real because they've been brainwashed by the financial fake news media. Thank you for listening. My name is Mike Adams. My job is to show you these shocking truths that are hiding in plain sight. Oh my God, there was something so bizarre that happened to me today. It's kind of personal, but I'm going to share it with you anyway, because it was like a big aha that explained to me sort of who I am, why I am the way I am, which is kind of an interesting thing to know, no matter who you are, right? Don't you want to know why you are the way you are? This is a real shocker. I can't believe that this never occurred to me earlier. It was such a shock. So I was actually in the lab working on the liquid automation handling robot. And this robot is a massive pain in the ass. Don't get me wrong, it's awesome. But I'm on month 3 working on this thing because I'm trying to pipette very precise volumes of methanol. And oh my God. And this is for sample prep for the cannabidiol analysis. We're doing a lot of automation and also for pesticide analysis and things like that. Anyway, I'm trying to move volumes of methanol with precision plus or minus 1 microliter. Okay? A microliter, a millionth of a liter at a time. That kind of precision. And I'm getting there, but I have to build these calibration curves for every different volume from like 5 microliters up to 1,000. It's insane. It's insanely tedious. Anyway, so I'm sitting there and I'm waiting on this robot to run this latest batch. I have to do all the scripting too. I have to write it's got its own scripting language. I've got variables in there like if-then statements, loops, subroutines, all kinds of stuff. So I'm scripting this dang robot. And I have to hit go and I have to pass the time for like 5 minutes between sessions of this robot. And so I was checking the Daily Mail science section, and this article comes up that says, "Can you see the hidden animals? Experts say only the, quote, overly analytical will spot all 4 creatures in this fiendishly tricky seaside puzzle." Now, if you're watching this on YouTube or Vimeo, I'm going to have the thumbnail of this image put on the screen for you. If not, this comes from a website called Playbuzz. All one word, Playbuzz. And it's like a seaside illustration. And apparently it's got a fox, a bat, an antelope, and a flamingo concealed in the picture. So this picture pops up on my screen while I'm waiting for the robot. And I look at it, and I'm like, are there animals hidden here besides the obvious ones? And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, yeah, there's the antelope, there's the bat, there's the fox or whatever it is, and there's this, I guess it's a flamingo, but I called it a dodo bird because it looked like a dodo bird as far as I'm concerned. And I'm like, okay, those are obvious. Those like I saw those instantly, the in 2 seconds when I looked at the picture. I'm like, are there other hidden animals that are going to be hard to find? And the answer is no. The answer is that apparently, this is what's shocking to me, a lot of people have trouble seeing these animals. And now I'm not trying to in any way put people down who don't see these animals immediately. All I'm actually saying is that I found out that there's something different about the way I see things, where these patterns just immediately become obvious to me. They leap out just instantly. I didn't have to look for these things. I didn't have to try. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is because this explains everything about the way that I am able to pull patterns out of the news or current events, or to make projections that are eerily accurate about what's going to happen in the future. I look at the world the same way I looked at this drawing. The patterns are immediately obvious to me without even trying, and I can't turn it off. Do you understand? I'm not bragging about this. It's kind of a curse, actually. I can't turn this off. I look at this image and boom, there's the 4 animals just instantly, immediately visible. So much so that I was confused about, was this the puzzle? And yet this is also the way that I observe the world. I see the patterns. And even when I'm doing science in the lab, for example, I see the patterns in what's going on. It's like there's something about the way that my brain processes the world that tends to see things that are there, but that other people don't necessarily see very easily. It takes them a lot of time and focus to see the things that were obvious to me. And as I thought about it, this really explained a lot of like what I do as a journalist. So when I'm writing about, hey, there's African green monkey kidney cells in the smallpox vaccine, or there's human fetal lung tissue in the varicella vaccine, chickenpox vaccine, and I start connecting all the dots on this stuff because I'm citing the CDC's own document on this, to me, it's obvious that these ingredients are in vaccines, but to the typical person, they can't see it. Even though it's right in front of them, just like with this photo, this seaside Playbuzz illustration, it's right in front of you, but a lot of people, the sort of mainstream people, can never see what's right in front of their noses. They can't see it. They're not blind. It's just that their brains don't process it. You see the difference? Now, you're probably more like me in that you look at this picture. I hope you're looking at it now. And it's pretty easy to see. Yeah, there's the flamingo bird sort of falling over, looking like a rock on the left side. And then the other 3 animals are, on the side of the ocean, the rock. I mean, my God, it's almost like, to me, it looks so obvious. It's like an Indian painting of an antelope on the rock. Well, how can you miss it? Come on. I still can't believe this must be some kind of a trick. I can't believe that people can look at this and not see the animals. Anyway, the point is, you're probably more like me, where you're able to see these things very quickly. I don't know if that's because maybe you and I are older and our brains have more experience. We have more brain training, if you will, living in the real world and processing perceptions and being observant and connecting the dots. Whereas the typical internet user today is probably younger than us, and their brains are just not as experienced, not as mature. They really can't see things. And that's why they're crappy journalists, because they can't connect the dots. They can't look beyond the obvious. They can't see the patterns that are in the data or in the behavior, or they can't see the corruption behind the curtain. They're not able to see these things, literally and figuratively. And so it was just a big realization. It just explained a lot. The perfect metaphor, actually, for so much of what I do. And I want to share this with you. I want to share this with you because it's so personal, to say, I do what I do. I don't wake up in the morning and have to pump myself up to get going. What I do is automatic. What I do, I can't even help what I do. Analyzing the news, warning about events that are coming that I know that might be harmful to you, pointing out the lies and corruption in the status quo. These are things that my brain does automatically without me even saying go. It's like this engine is running at all times, observing the world, processing information, and spitting out answers and patterns. It's almost like, I'm not saying that I'm autistic or anything, but it's almost like the way autistic children are sometimes portrayed in movies, like a Rain Man type of character who is very deficient in many areas of processing. In the case of that character, social processing was suppressed or perhaps damaged, or however you want to describe it. Whereas in that character's case, the mathematical processing was incredibly advanced. And you have, throughout history, you have Asperger's children and autistic children, and you have many children who were maybe diagnosed as autistic, and then they turn out to be geniuses in certain areas, such as music, for example, or art, or mathematics. And the process that these children go through, especially as they grow older and become adults, they recognize that the answers to them, it just emerges. It's an emergent property of their own neurology. For example, many of these great musicians, they can't turn off the music. The music just comes to them. It's something that just springs forth from their neurology, and they hear music, and they have to write the music. They have to write the symphony. It's almost a compulsion to get this out, because they feel it's like a wellspring of this creativity that keeps coming forth from them. And when you get to those who are mathematically gifted, and whether they're autistic or not autistic at all, maybe just mathematical geniuses, for example, you'll find that the same thing happens to them. They look at a mathematical equation or a problem, their brain, boom, it just processes it. It just starts doing the math for them, and it might start, well, with formulas and so on. It might turn the formula into a 3D model and start processing the 3D model automatically in their brain, and they would start visualizing what the formula represents without even trying to do so. And when we're talking about even data or pictures, there are some especially gifted people who can look at data, and their brains can start to process it or decrypt it or find patterns that other people could not find. And this is a very real phenomenon. And it spans, a great number of different types of neurological, let's say, gifts for many different kinds of human beings and children, and some autistic, some Asperger's, some just what used to be called, although I don't think this is a politically correct term anymore, used to be called an idiot savant. I don't think that's an appropriate term. We don't want to use the word idiot for people who are gifted like that. So anyway, I'm starting to suspect that there's some part of who I am that is this processing observational engine that I can't even really, I can't turn it off. Not that I want to, but it's just that I want you to know that what I do, it comes from a place of almost a need to express these patterns that I see out there. It is, when I look at the world, I can look at the same data or the same news as somebody else. They don't see anything. I see the pattern. I see the corruption behind the scenes. I see the dots connected. I see the real science behind the fake science, or the real news behind the fake news. And it's also obvious to me that in many ways, I can't understand how everybody else can't see it also immediately at the same time. So, there used to be like subliminal advertising, for example. I could always spot the subliminal elements in ads just instantly, whether they are sort of small elements within a full-page ad, like a photo, or whether they are metaphorical messages in advertising and so on. I could always spot these immediately, and yet I found that people around me had no clue how they were being impacted by the influence of that ad. And so I think this is one of the reasons why I've always been also immune to corporate advertising and branding advertising and social pressure, because I can always tell when it's being used against me, like weaponized against me. I can always tell when some corporation is trying to influence me. And I immediately reject it because I can see it. But again, the average consumer has no idea how they are being manipulated by corporate interests or corporate advertising or public relations, from, politics to corporations to, environmentalism or whatever the case may be. Most people have no clue how they are being twisted or influenced or shaped by a process that should be obvious to them, but they just can't see it. So really, the upshot of all this is, one of my goals, you know that my goals have always been to educate and uplift humanity, to protect life, to help people become more enlightened and more aware of what's going on in the world around them. I would like to find a way to help other people develop this skill or processing or whatever it is, the ability to look at a photo and see the patterns that other people miss. And by the way, this little puzzle says that only the, quote, overly analytical will be able to see these patterns. The overly analytical. I guess that's me. I guess I'm overly analytical. I guess you could be called worse, right? That's not the worst thing in the world to be called. The overly analytical would be better than the cognitively retarded analytical, which would be the flip side of it. But in any case, according to these puzzle creators, I guess I'm overly analytical. And actually, I think it's accurate, except I wouldn't use the word overly. I would just say analytical. Of course, I'm analytical in terms of analyzing everything. I'm always analyzing everything. I'm analyzing what people say. I'm trying to measure the BS factor. I'm analyzing, the news. I'm analyzing market conditions, financial data. I'm always working on things in the lab. I'm analyzing, in this case, the volumetric transfer pipetting capability of an automated liquid handling robot system. And that takes a lot of analysis, by the way. Just to give you an example, you have to use a magnifier and a flashlight to look for the drop accumulation of the liquid on the tip of the pipette. And because of the surface tension and hydrogen bonding characteristics that are different between solvents versus water, different kinds of liquids will have different clinging capabilities to the tip of the pipette. And so I am literally there with a magnifier and a flashlight looking at how much dichloromethane, DCM, is on the tip of a pipette. And it's like, yeah, I guess you have to be analytical to have the patience to sit there and do that kind of thing. So that's me. I admit it. I'm highly analytical. So the challenge with that is that I live in a world where most people are not analytical, and that most people are actually analytically suppressed and are not able to see the things that are obvious to people like you and me. So that's the challenge. So how do we wake other people up? How do we expand their analytical capabilities? And really, if you think about this, the answer comes down to teaching people how to think. You ever notice that we're raised in a society and we're taught how to pay taxes. We're taught how to worship supermodel bodies on TV or whatever. We're taught how to be obedient and to comply with your peers and so on. We're taught all these kinds of things. We're never taught how to think. How do you expand your thinking skills? How do you expand your observational skills? How do you improve or deepen your analytical capabilities so that you can look at situations or analyze situations and come to correct conclusions? We're never taught that. You ever wonder why? Because that makes individuals hard for the status quo to control and manipulate. If you can think for yourself, they can't lie to you as easily on the campaign trail, can they? If you can think for yourself, they can't lie to you as easily about the national budget deficit and the annual debt spending and compounding interest, credit risk, and so on. If you can think for yourself, you're hard for the system to manipulate into voting for the criminals that they want in charge of the whole system. So they don't teach you how to think. And it's only through this process of self-enrichment, frankly, that any of us ever really learn how to think. Now, of course, you might say, well, college maybe taught you how to think, and I'm sure college had an influence on me, of course. And maybe that's the only real thing you get out of college these days is some cognitive improvements of some kind. I don't know. But I went to college, many decades ago, and today's colleges, I don't think they're teaching as much, frankly, about how to think. So I'm not even sure that's very valuable today versus what it was when I was in college. But the point is, very few people, I think, end up going through life and actually training themselves how to think, training themselves how to read news, how to analyze news, how to see through the lies of official statements and read through the deceptions of press releases. And you got to realize most of the mainstream media today is nothing more than PR. It's just public relations for corporations and government. That's it. I mean, again, another obvious thing that perhaps is not so obvious to everyone else. The point is, I would love to find a way to help teach other people how to think with more clarity. So, I don't know. Maybe, wouldn't that be interesting to just sort of launch a whole new project at teaching people how to think? But then again, it might not be very successful because I'm not sure that people want to know how to think. I mean, a lot of people might find it boring. Like, what do you mean? You're going to teach me how to think? I can think. I think Hillary Clinton is awesome. Whatever. If you're going to teach people how to think, I don't know. That might be asking a lot. I'm not sure. It's not just a logic class, by the way. Not just logic. A lot of thinking is really holistic thinking. I mean, when you look at these pictures like this puzzle, it's not a logic problem. It really isn't. It is a holistic pattern recognition problem. Your brain has to process patterns, man. Your brain has to look at the whole picture and look at patterns and images and colors and textures. It's not just a logic class. Yeah, we can talk about logic all day, deduction and logic loops and all kinds of Boolean logic or what have you. That's not the same as learning how to think or learning how to process. So, I don't know. If you've got ideas, certainly do chime off in the comments. If this is on an article, then put your comments in the comment section. I'd certainly be interested in your comments. Is there a way to teach people how to think more clearly or how to process or see things more clearly? Is there? Because if there were, that might be the biggest breakthrough in human history, frankly, if there was some way to quickly teach people how to wake up and think for themselves. Oh my God, right? That would be one of the greatest neurological achievements perhaps in the history of humanity. But I would imagine that there isn't something that's so easy or simple. Otherwise, probably it would have been discovered by now. My guess is that neurological training is something that takes decades to do well, like any skill. If you want to do something well, you got to put in about 5,000 hours of training, practice into it. If you want to master something, it's probably more like 10,000 hours. And it's probably the same with pattern recognition and thinking skills and holistic observational processing. It's probably, 5 to 10,000 hours of doing it. And then you become really dang good at it. And so, the average American is not going to put 5,000 hours into improving their thinking skills when there's 5,000 hours of quality primetime television that they might miss in the process, right? There's 5,000 hours of sports and fashion shows. Oh my God, you can't miss that stuff. Who wants to spend 5,000 hours learning how to think? Especially when society makes it so you don't really have to think that much. All you got to do is sort of go along, do as you're told, vote for whoever you're told to vote for, and don't rock the boat, you see. Yeah, applaud on command. Then you're going to fit in just fine. Yeah, who needs to think when they've already told you everything that you could possibly want to think about? Who needs critical thinking skills when thinking is practically an extinct skill set in a society that demands obedience combined with mass stupidity, right? Critical thinking is almost a curse in our society today because of the political correctness, the dumbing down of the language control, the thought control. Yeah. Now you're starting to connect the dots too, you see? You see how this all comes together? Interesting, isn't it? All right, well, I'll leave you with that, but if you want to try this little puzzle thing on your friends, just, I don't know, show them this on your phone or a screen or print it out or whatever. See if they can spot the animals right away. Because I'm really curious if this is, how many of us can just instantly see all these animals, because they don't look that hidden to me. They look really, really obvious. So check with your friends. See if they're hidden at all. I don't think they're hidden. I think this whole thing is a joke, frankly. I think it's like, it's so obvious. To call it a puzzle is kind of a joke, kind of an exaggeration. Maybe this is some kind of early April Fool's thing. I don't know. Anyway, pretty bizarre. Thanks for listening. Take care. Click subscribe to stay plugged in to the Health Ranger Report.
Yeah, Mike Adams, the Health Ranger, giving us something to think about there. But that's not all we have, because there's one more somewhere around. This is the naturalnews.com website. You really want to check out the top link there. TED Talks exposed as scripted pseudo-knowledge theater. Powerful stuff, challenging stuff at the same time. So there's one more presentation from Mike Adams. And that's going to be about humanity as a collective. I'll leave you in the hands of Mike Adams.
Most animals and even bacteria, if given the chance, will destroy themselves because they will destroy the ecosystem in which they exist. They will destroy their environment. Basically, they'll eat everything in their environment. They'll reproduce and expand to destroy.
Yay, thank you very much to the streaming system. Streaming systems are running low on this presentation. I'm going to reload it and see if I can.
Most animals and even bacteria, if given the chance, will destroy themselves because they will destroy the ecosystem in which they exist. They will destroy their environment. Basically, they'll eat everything in their environment. They'll reproduce and expand to destroy the environment. Let me just give an example. Suppose you have a grain silo out somewhere. I'll use that example because I live in rural Texas, so I see grain silos. And suppose you have a small population of mice, 10 or so, and they're living on the grain. They discover this grain silo. They live on it. Well, they will reproduce, and one mouse, and mice are mammals, of course, and they can reproduce quite quickly, and they can have, like, let's say 5 babies at a time. Every, I don't know what their cycle is, reproduction cycle. Let's call it 6 weeks, just as a wild guess. All right, so every 6 weeks they can produce 5 more babies, and then maybe it's only 90 days or 120 days until those become mature enough to reproduce, and then they can keep going. If you do the math on this, then what you find is that the mouse population explodes rather rapidly, eating into the grain until you get to a day where there's no more grain, but the mice population is huge. Like depending on how much grain you started with, maybe tens of thousands of mice. It's happened before, trust me. Farmers who've had grain silos, they know what I'm talking about. Some days you open it up and there's 10,000 mice in there. It's happened. or rats or whatever, field mice. The point is, now I know we're not mice. Humans aren't mice. Of course we're not. But every animal does this. Every animal reproduces and destroys or consumes the resources in its environment until it reaches a point of non-sustainability and crashes. So, and this isn't just a talk about population. This is about the philosophy of self-destruction under which humanity suffers, just like many other species. So humanity is on so many paths right now that are completely unsustainable, it might shock you, frankly, to really think about them all. I mean, fossil fuels consumption, for example, the erosion of tillable soils, food production. How are you going to produce more food when the soils are being eroded and blown away by winds and so on, and nutritionally depleted at the same time, by the way? What about population growth? What about ecological destruction? We're seeing a collapse in honeybee pollinators. We're seeing a collapse in fish populations in the oceans. Fisheries are collapsing in many parts of the world. Commercial fishing is literally in a state of collapse. We're seeing the chemical contamination of our world through agricultural pesticides and herbicides, as well as industrial heavy metals. And it's just on and on and on. Genetic pollution, hormone-induced cancers, loss of fertility even. But mostly it's this worship of material consumption and material production. Very little is valued in society today except material consumption and material production. And because of that, because we live on a finite planet with a finite allocation of materials, those material resources are obviously going to run out. This is just as true with rare earth metals that are used in manufacturing solar and wind turbines as it is with tillable soils that are being blown away year after year. In some areas, losing an inch of topsoil a year. Yeah, that's not a very sustainable situation. Or what about just the water aquifers? In northern Texas and Oklahoma and parts of Colorado, there's the Ogallala water aquifer that's running out. It's dropping, I don't know, a foot a year or a couple of feet a year, and it's going to be gone in, I think, less than 25 years, or mostly gone. So you've got all these unsustainable vectors at work. You've got a population that as a whole, the crowd, the mob of humanity is no different in its final results, no different from that silo, that grain silo full of mice. Now, the mice, each individual mouse doesn't want to die, but as a whole, the mouse population behaves in a suicidal way because it's non-sustainable and it must end in catastrophic collapse. So that's what's similar with humanity. Each individual human is not uniquely, not suicidal on their own, but as a group, humanity is effectively a suicide cult because it is engaged in actions that will destroy humanity. Actions that lead to complete ecological destruction, which of course leads to collapse and leads to, depopulation, and leads to, sadly, a lot of suffering and death and so on. So I guess my point is the distinction between the individual in a population versus the effect of the entire group. So an individual can be rather intelligent, even while the group as a whole is incredibly stupid. In other words, the intelligence of the group's actions are not the average of the IQs of the individual members of that group. Rather, the group dynamic itself is far more stupid than the individuals within the group. That's a key realization because it tells you that you can have a society where lots of people are very, very smart. You can have a society where people, many individuals, are engaged in long-term planning. They want to have a sustainable ecosystem or a sustainable population. They plan ahead. financially and in terms of preparedness and survival or even family planning or what have you. Lots of people can be intelligent and they can plan ahead, and yet they can still be part of an incredibly stupid net result population group that is suicidal as a whole. And I believe that that's what we're living under right now, or as part of, that human civilization as it exists today is a suicide cult. I mean, look, we're living on a planet that's dying, and it's dying because of us. It's dying because of things that we have done to it in terms of chemical poisoning, synthesizing toxic chemicals and heavy metals pollution. And of course, progressives would argue climate change as well, although I happen to know that the NOAA data on that has been fraudulently altered and it's a hoax, but that's beside the point. Our planet is dying in other ways. There is pollution. Even if the NOAA faked the data, there are other forms of pollution, other ways that we're destroying the planet. Now, because we're destroying the planet, we are also destroying ourselves in the process. So we're on a sick planet, but we're also a sick people. The population is diseased. Cancer rates are through the roof. I mean, in terms of human history, there's never been a time in human history where there are higher rates of cancer than there are right now. And the cancers are happening younger and younger. They say in the 1700s or even most of the 1800s, they say, well, infant death rates were really high. 50% of the babies died before they were 3. Well, now 50% of people get cancer almost, before the age of 50. We've gone from an era in which people died from communicable diseases due to a lack of basic running water and soap and basic sewer systems, to now we're dying from our own suicidal chemical contamination. Pesticides, herbicides, glyphosate, hormone disruptors, food packaging chemicals, toxic dentistry, the mercury in your teeth, all the crap in your shampoo and your hand lotion and your dryer sheets, your fabric softener is full of cancer-causing chemicals. All the stuff people spray on their lawns and use to wash their cars, and the chemicals in the home building materials, the formaldehyde that's off-gassing in the glues in your carpet. All of these things is a form of chemical suicide, even though individually there might be people who say, I want to live in a green home, a more environmentally friendly home, but society as a whole is so invested in the toxic products and the cheaply produced but chemically enhanced products that it's even hard to source green products that are sustainable, truly sustainable. Very, very hard to even get your hands on it, even if you want to. You go out to eat. How many restaurants serve organic? Very few. So restaurants are serving people poison by definition, because non-organic food is sprayed with poison to kill the pests by definition, and it's all laced with that poison. I mean, I can go out to any restaurant and take a food sample, take it back to my laboratory, and I can run it through the mass spec time of flight system that I use there, and I can show you traces of, probably 100 different pesticides, herbicides, and other toxic chemicals. They're in everything. Almost everything. In fact, we typically find a couple hundred different chemicals in well water, even in rural Texas. You're like, how did it get in the well water? Well, human activity, pollution. That's how it got there. So my point is, we are individually compassionate and concerned and intelligent, and yet as a whole, as a group, our species is a suicide cult. And sadly, we are wrapped up in it. It's going to be hard for us to avoid being victimized by that system because it is so destructive, self-destructive, and so has such poor planning and very poor ability to engage in true sustainable lifestyles. And just the consumerism of everything is unsustainable. We're building massive landfills full of throwing away plastic and metal and junk and e-waste. Your old iPhone, your old monitor, all that stuff. It just piles up somewhere. We're building mountains of junk and trash while we're mining rare earth minerals out of these dirty mines that are releasing copper and releasing nickel, other toxic metals, lead and cadmium into the environment, and of course mercury. So it's not sustainable. This lifestyle we're living right now, all of us, is not sustainable. I mean, most of us. So that's something to think about. Even if you're intelligent, informed, and doing the right thing, you are part of a suicide cult. We all are. And the hard part is going to be, how do we make sure we don't get taken down with it when that catastrophic collapse day actually comes? Because it is coming. So, and as I've said in other podcasts too, your greatest threat is going to be other people who are unprepared. Your greatest threat is not lack of water or food. You can deal with that, but they can't, because they've never thought about it, so they're shocked and they're desperate and they're freaking out. And they thought they were smart. They didn't realize they were part of a suicide cult. So, hope that gives you something to think about. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. And in any case, if you're thinking about this issue, that's my goal with these podcasts. So thank you for listening. Again, this is Mike Adams, the Health Ranger. And you can find more of my podcasts at healthrangerreport.com. Click subscribe to stay plugged in to the Health Ranger Report.
Yeah, that's Mike Adams, the Health Ranger. And you should be able to see on the screen in front of you the naturalnews.com website, chock full of reference reports, videos, radio stations, infographics, music. There are reference libraries for medicines, blogs, lab results, articles. He's a one-man army. And he's super cool. So the final point made by Mike Adams there was that that your greatest threat in life is not you being prepared or you not being prepared. It's the people around you not being prepared. Now, I have an example of this from my own experience, which is that I had in my house, before I sold my house, a reserve of food and water, just in case. You never know. So, and it was food that we could use if we needed to. It was storable food, but also edible and relatively healthy. And when I talked to some other local people about whether or not they thought it was a good idea to store stuff, they all said that they would never store stuff. And when I asked them why, they said they don't need to. And when I asked them why they don't need to, they said, because you're storing it. We can use your stuff. You see the collective mindset? You see how it's going to work? When they can't take from others, they come and they take from you. That's something to think about for sure. So, thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for copying and sharing this information. If you can copy and share it. This is G signing out from the Academy of Language Therapy and Life Coaching. Please visit us on Facebook. Visit us on YouTube check in to our home site with lots of free videos and coaching there. Remember, you can control the content by getting involved in the conversation. So that's it for now. Thank you very much for being there, and share if you care. Wherever you are, have a great morning, afternoon, and evening. This is me signing off pretty soon. Do-do-do. No music, no music. That's it. Dude, it done. Gone. Bye.